Okay, we are going to kick off session number 2. Thank you so much everyone for making their way back in. I am delighted to introduce Stephen Bartholomeusz, Head of Public and Regulatory Affairs APAC for Neste, our gold sponsors. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Shahana, and thank you to the team at Bioenergy Australia as well for pulling together another excellent event. I'm just going to go through very quickly about our operations here in the Asia-Pacific region and then really focus on the session today. So starting with Neste's purpose, our purpose is to create a healthier planet for our children. And everything that Neste does, so the production of low-carbon liquid fuels for the aviation and also for the road sector, stem from this purpose. In the Asia-Pacific region, we have a refinery and a commercial office in Singapore, and we also have a presence in China, Australia, and India, which is primarily focused at feedstock aggregation. And here in the Asia-Pacific region, we've grown significantly since our early days in 2009, when we first set up operations in Singapore to aggregate feedstock. A lot of people talk about the expanded Singapore refinery, which came on stream in 2023. But actually, Neste has had a refinery in Singapore that's been producing renewable diesel since 2010. With the expansion of our Singapore refinery, we now have the capability to produce 2.5 million tons of biofuels in Singapore. And Singapore also has the capability to produce about 1 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel, making it the largest SAF refinery in the world at the moment. So what we do is really to produce renewable products and bring them to market. And if you look at our renewable products, we have products in 3 main areas. We produce bio-naphtha for the renewable polymers and chemical sector, renewable diesel for road transportation, and sustainable aviation fuel for the aviation sector. It is quite significant that when you come to road transport, Australia announced a new paraffinic diesel standard last Monday on the 24th of February. So I think it's very significant that you have a new paraffinic diesel standard. And we also have supplied renewable diesel to Rio Tinto for a trial that they've done in one of their mines here in Australia. But then moving on to the topic at hand today, which is really focused on the role of low-carbon liquid fuels. How do we meet the global demand? In 2021, the world used about 4,700 million tons of oil equivalent globally, out of which 2,700 million tons of oil equivalent were used in the transportation sector. In 2021, biofuels were able to displace about 100 million tons of the nearly 2,700 million tons of fossil fuel that was used in the transportation sector. And EVs potentially displaced about 40 million tons of oil equivalent. So out of the 2,700 million tons of fossil fuel that was used in the transportation sector, only about 140 million tons were displaced by EVs and biofuels. But with the potential for growth of the biofuel sector as well as the EV sector, in 2040, biofuels could potentially displace about 1,000 million tons of oil equivalent by 2040. EVs could potentially displace about another 1,000 million tons. And then with all the new technologies that we have in hand with power to liquids and hydrogen, a significant amount of fossil fuel that is used in the transportation sector could be displaced. So the panelists that we have here today are going to talk about their vision and their view of how the different companies that they represent are working towards displacing fossil fuel in the transportation sector. Now, I won't go through the individual speakers one by one because, as you can see, it's a fairly large panel. We'll have to manage people's time. For the panelists, please manage your time and listen for the bell. But with that in mind, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, and then we'll follow in the order here. So I'd like to introduce Mac Irvine, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Jet Zero, to come and give his presentation. Mac, over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Good morning, everyone. And likewise, I want to thank Shahana and the Bioenergy Australia team for hosting another fantastic event. Yep, so just quickly, so Mac Irvine, CFO of Jet Zero Australia, joined about 12 months ago. Probably know a lot of you in the room for having spent 8 years prior to that at the CFC, where I was providing capital to projects, and now I'm seeking capital from projects, so it's interesting to be on the other side. So Jet Zero Australia is a specialist SAF developer and operator in the Australian market primarily, but also looking for developing projects globally. It's important to note we're not a technology company or an R&D company. We are very much a developer and operator, which means that we look to procure what we believe to be commercialised or commercialising technologies in the market, and then putting all of the different components of projects together. So that includes, site approvals, technology, construction contracts, offtake, feedstock arrangements, and the like. We very much look to develop our projects with a commercial mindset. So what does that mean? So as I mentioned, we consider first and foremost technologies that we believe to be commercialised or commercialising, and also applying what we call an attractive cost-plus operating model. So we're thinking about very much like an infrastructure mindset to the way that we develop our projects and stitch those projects together. So that includes things like long-term feedstock arrangements, long-term offtake arrangements, and very bankable structures in order to raise significant capital to bring those projects to market. And then from a knowledge and expertise perspective, we've developed what we believe to be a purpose-built development and operating team. So from the likes of Shell, Woodside, Fluor, and global investment banks. So the reality is to develop first-of-kind projects in the market, you really need skill sets across, design, development, engineering, investment, and bringing the commerciality around all of those sorts of things. And very pleased to say we've got a very strong team developing these projects and ultimately developing, an efficient delivery platform. So when we think about innovation, we think less about the innovation, the technology side, and more about the technical and financial solutions. So what we're doing at the moment with all of our projects is really thinking about, as I said, that commercial mindset earlier, and thinking about, CapEx optimization, delivery pathways, and then from a bankability perspective and raising capital, what is the investment community seeking in order to bring these projects to financial close? We currently have 2 projects in the pipeline that have been publicly announced. There are a couple of others sitting behind this, but from sort of a public announcements perspective, the 2 to mention Project Ulysses, which is an alcohol-to-jet SAF plant, and the second is Project Mandala, which is a HEFA plant. So no doubt most of you in the room will be familiar with these types of technology pathways, but A to J, or alcohol-to-jet, is essentially taking ethanol, converting that into SAF renewable diesel, and then HEFA is the hydro-processed esters and fatty acids pathway. So taking used cooking oil, tallow, canola, other sort of oil or lipids type feedstocks and converting that to SAF renewable diesel. Project Ulysses is our flagship project, although the project that's most progressed through the development life cycle, currently in FEED and looking to reach FID by the end of this year. The production capacity for that facility is 113 million litres per annum in total, of which about 102 million litres per annum is SAF and 11 million litres per annum of renewable diesel. So about a 90%, 10% split of SAF to renewable diesel, utilising a domestic supply of ethanol as the feedstock, and the licence arrangement we have with LanzaJet for that alcohol-to-jet pathway. We've received about $15 million in grant funding support from both the Australian and federal governments. So $9 million from ARENA for FEED, as well as $5 million from the Queensland government for the FEED program, as well as about $760,000 from the Queensland government for feasibility before that. And it would be remiss of me not to mention, from a broader investment perspective, the investment we've received from the likes of Qantas, Airbus and Idemitsu, not only from the investment perspective, but also from a broader strategic relationship perspective, and the support that they give us very broadly within sort of the aviation community and beyond. And Stephen Forshaw touched on that earlier in terms of the support, both from an investment perspective and strategic perspective that Airbus has given, as well as the other investors I mentioned. And then we've also got Technip Energies appointed as the FEED contractor, and then working through currently what that looks like and converting to a sort of fully fledged EPC arrangement. And Project Mandala, as I mentioned earlier, is the HEFA SAF project. So we're currently in feasibility, looking to close that out by about June of this year. That's a larger project. That's about a 290 million litre per annum project, looking to produce first SAF by 2030. I mentioned the feedstocks earlier. From a grants perspective, we've received about $1 million from both the Singapore and Australian federal governments. And the reason being, we've actually got a JV partner called Appear Bioenergy, which is a used cooking oil collator and Asia's largest collator of UCO, as a JV partner in the project, supplying some of the feedstock for that. And we're also considering options for sort of upstream, if you like, towards feedstock pathways. So looking at Pongamia trials in North Queensland at the moment, and then subject to the success of those and the outcomes of those, looking to expand and scale that beyond. I won't touch too much on mandates because no doubt most of you in the room are already familiar with this, but just safe to say that globally mandates are driving the demand, and particularly by 2030. So we're looking at sort of billions of litres of SAF requirement coming by 2030, but obviously step changes even from 2025. For example, in the UK and EU, with those mandates that have already come into place as of January, and other mandates that were touched on earlier within the group, like Singapore, for example. And then closer to home, we've got not a specific mandate or policy in play, and no doubt you're going to hear a lot about this, as the conference goes on. But Qantas, for example, has a 10% voluntary commitment of SAF by 2030, which is about 600 millilitres per annum. Qatar recently came in as an investor in Virgin Australia, which I believe was formalised and approved very recently, and they've got sort of SAF commitments that they're talking about through that partnership. The Brisbane Olympics obviously is 7 years away, 2032, looking for targeting net zero. And then from a governmental perspective, you've got the likes of the Defence Force and a couple of different energy strategies that they delivered by the end of last year as well. So, as I said, whilst there is no sort of formalised, policy to date in Australia, there's obviously lots of voluntary commitments which are very important. From a technology perspective, there are obviously a variety of different technologies and pathways that are being explored by in the markets globally. As I mentioned earlier, the two key pathways that Jet2 Australia is progressing to date is the HEFA pathway and the alcohol to jet pathway, and sort of different reasons for that. We have explored, at different stages, the various technologies out there, and I think, we, in the internal house views, we believe that they're all viable, at a point in time. We believe that over the longer term, we're going to need all of these technologies and all of the feedstocks available to us to reach the decarbonisation targets, which are, very meaningful longer term. But sort of as a developer to date, these are the two focus areas for us, but we'll look to sort of expand and pursue those over the longer term when we believe that they sort of make sense for us as a developer. In terms of Ulysses, I've touched on sort of the key highlights already, but just to maybe touch on a few more. So this project is being developed and will be delivered in Townsville in North Queensland. You can see the sort of green box on the right-hand side there. That's the project site. It's about a 22-hectare site in total. It's about 8 kilometres from the port of Townsville. So in terms of getting ethanol shipped into the port and then trucked down about an 8-kilometre road into our facility, and then the SAF renewable diesel coming out into the port if required as well. It's great from a logistics perspective. It's also what's called the Cleveland Bay Industrial Park, or CBIP, which is essentially vacant blocks of land that are designed essentially for this type of, we're building a refinery ultimately, so heavy industrial use zone, and it had incredible support from the Queensland State Government through the approvals pathway in terms of sort of developing those approvals and closing those out very shortly. It's also very close to what's essentially referred to as the Garrison City in North Queensland as well, so up to 10,000 defence personnel. So from an offtake perspective, there's an opportunity there for both SAF and renewable diesel for us to be supplying to the Defence Force, which we are having discussions with today. And there's sort of other industrial potential partners in the bottom right there as well, likes of ARC Energy, that we're having conversations with as well about potential synergies there too. So all in all, it's a fantastic site for us to be developing a project, and very, like as I said earlier, to have the Queensland Government support there as well. Just going to do a quick flyover of the site. So I talked about the Port of Townsville in the north there earlier. This is sort of a mock-up by Technip Energies, who's our engineering contractor. The green line there being that road I mentioned earlier, sort of coming into the facility. As we sort of go through this, you've got, that's as I said, the plant layout. You've got the truck loading unit at the front there, the hydrogen unit. We need hydrogen to sort of crack the molecules into SAF renewable diesel. processing unit there, which is sort of the secret sauce, and the laydown area at the back there, which is required for our construction, laydown materials and then building the facility. The hydrogen I've already mentioned, and then the IS and the OSS, so IS being inside battery limit, so essentially the processing, the refinery compartment, if you like, and then the OS being the outside battery limit, so tankage and storage facilities and things of that nature. Really quickly then, from a sort of a process flow perspective, we've got in the dash box there, essentially that's what Jet Zero is doing. We're putting together all of the different component parts of the refinery. That's a 4-stage process. We then go into the SAF blending. It's a max SAF blend of 50%. It goes into an off-taker, so for example, Qantas, who's an investor, as well as Airbus from the Scope 3 perspective, and then the Qantas Coalition, just an example of potential Scope 3 counterparties as well. From a products perspective, we consider ourselves to be producers of full products. So SAF and renewable diesel is the physical molecules, and Jet Zero Elevate is sort of the brand name that we've got associated with our SAF. And then the Scope 1 and Scope 3 certificates as well. So we have the ability to sell the bundled fuel, so the physical and the digital or environmental attributes, or there is the ability to decouple those as well and sell those and monetize those within the value chain as well. And these are the conversations we're having with off-takers to date. Conscious of time, so just probably from a last slide, this is obviously the critical one in terms of bringing the regions to the runway. It's been talked about already in terms of investment, jobs, supporting rural and regional communities, fuel security, all of these key benefits. And given that the sort of the feedstocks and technology pathways I mentioned earlier is really about biomass and biological resources available in Australia, which has already been touched on and will continue to be touched on, no doubt, for the rest of this conference. We have an incredible opportunity from that feedstock perspective, and ultimately that goes to supporting these rural and regional communities as well, whether that be supporting existing communities, transitioning jobs from sort of the fossil fuel sector to the green economy, and just basically the general support for these areas, for a whole bunch of different reasons we've already outlined. And then just final slide, we're very proud as Jet Zero to be, what we believe to be leaders in the sustainability space and supporting, for example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island students through the NRL Cowboys House initiative, as well as the Healthy Waterways Partnership Dry Tropics, so supporting those two key initiatives, and members of RSB and ISCC, and then very fortunate to have received a couple of awards from the sustainability work that we've done at Jet Zero as well. And I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kimberly Camrass, and I'm the Australia, New Zealand and South Pacific Sustainability Lead at Boeing. So the phrase state of play refers to what is happening now in a situation that's always evolving and changing. And I think we could say that the SAF global ecosystem is indeed that. We've seen significant changes over recent decades through early piloting and testing, periods of slowdown due to changing political priorities, and more recently and positively, growing policy development. So in November last year, Boeing and CSIRO continued our 35 years of collaboration and published our first SAF State of Play report. This documented the current global and domestic state of play with regards to SAF across 3 themes: policy, industry development, and research outputs. So if you haven't already seen it, I do encourage you to take a look at it. The report also contained a section on emerging insights. So these were gathered from extensive engagement with leaders across the SAF ecosystem in Australia and New Zealand, and looked at what is actually emerging and what needs to be focused on for future modelling and work. And I'll focus on that section of the report today. But first, briefly, what do we know about the global state of play? Well, around 45 countries, representing about 65% of global jet fuel use, are developing or implementing policies. And obviously, this is a significant demand signal in the run-up to 2030. We also know that significant progress in industry development and research is occurring as well. Domestically, policy is also critical, as we've heard numerous times this morning, to drive demand, but also to support industry development and de-risk private sector investment. And this is true at both a federal and a state level. We also increasingly are observing the role of defence in driving demand and scaling of SAF. So Boeing, at a global scale, released a no technical objection in 2024, confirming that SAF is safe for use across all of our military platforms. And domestically, we're seeing really significant action through defence, including through the recent release of the Future Energy Strategy and broader Air Force activity. I think the fact that Jet Zero Council has a dedicated work stream related to fuel security is also helping to drive progress. And as we know, SAF provides a strong energy independence opportunity. 22 countries supplying about 90% of the world's jet fuel today, to a scenario where so many more countries could actually have production capacity. And Australia is very well positioned in that regard. So in order to gain these emerging insights from across the ecosystem and in the development of the State of Play report, Boeing and CSIRO engaged leaders from about 28 organisations, and also Boeing and the New South Wales Decarb Hub engaged with over 50 finance sector leaders to get their views on opportunities and barriers with regards to SAF investment. And the report details these 4 primary categories of insights: feedstock availability and competition, sustainability and social perceptions, technological gaps and infrastructure needs, and of course, cost and market uncertainty. And that's what I'll focus on for the presentation today. So we all know that finance is a key pillar that will enable the scaling of a domestic SAF industry, and in conjunction with optimum technology pathways, feedstock and sustainability assurances, and of course policy. It's absolutely critical to drive the scaling of a SAF industry. So what do we need to finance that scale up? To meet demand, by 2050, Australia needs 26 full-scale refineries. And in New Zealand, that number is about 5 to 6. So clearly the financial numbers there are huge, but so are the economic opportunities as well. And we know that globally around 13 million jobs could be created through the scaling of this industry. I think we can see that Australia and New Zealand really have a role to play in getting their fair share of those economic benefits. So a few insights from the finance sector. They are looking for 4 characteristics of effective policy: simplicity, stability, transparency, and duration. And of course, the latter is really required to encourage those longer-term offtake agreements and ensure ongoing feedstock supply. They do largely see aviation as an attractive sector for investment with certain caveats, and obviously that huge quantum of capital required is one of those, along with a clear demand driver requirement. Contracts for difference or a guaranteed strike price could be considered, according to the finance sector, as core policy levers to encourage blended financing over time. So within the report, 7 themes related to cost and market certainty were explored. And the first of these is the opportunity that we have to nuance global decision-making frameworks around financing for an Australian context. So one of those is the ICAO SAF rules of thumb. So as you may be aware, these rules of thumb were developed by experts from Washington State University and Hasselt University. And they're essentially a set of heuristics for SAF that can be used to make order of magnitude decisions or estimations relating to SAF investment. So they provide the impact of feedstock cost, fuel yield, facility scale, total capital required, and minimum selling price for both Nth scale and pioneer scale facilities. We think these are a really highly useful framework for investment decision-making. However, all of the underpinning information was calculated using US costs and financial assumptions. So there's an opportunity to nuance these for an Australian context using our local data to provide a useful data set for policy makers and for prospective investors. Boeing is seeking to collaborate with partners to achieve this piece of work over 2025. A brief fly-through of some of the other key themes in the report. A gradual transition pathway that uses phases and intermediates and existing infrastructure is likely to be more financially palatable. And of course, in many areas of the world, that could involve co-processing to a limited degree in Australia, but it is still an opportunity that we can leverage. I think the importance of onshore blending of SAF and the growing capability that will bring, including through Wagner Sustainable Fuels work in that space from this year, will also be another important stepping stone. Cost of living pressures and the need to explore how these policy settings share and distribute the costs of supporting SAF adoption are really, really important. And I think, as we've heard today too, that the role of corporates in purchasing Scope 3 emissions reductions through SAF could also really help reduce that green premium. Of course, we also need to consider the market interdependencies. Aviation is not a sector that's looking for renewable fuels uptake in isolation from others. The role of government and defence, particularly in securing longer-term offtakes, and how we facilitate private financing requirements. We see the ICAO Finvest platform being developed as a really important global tool in that space. However, similar things can occur at a domestic level. Finally, I'll just touch on the role of SAF accounting as being a really critical unlock to reduce that cost premium as well. So, this is from the Aviation Benefits Beyond Borders report that you may be aware of, that is published by the Air Transport Action Group, that includes global financial and more regional financial data. And what this tells us is that in Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand, aviation, we know this, contributes significantly to GDP. But SAF is a really critical insurance policy now to ensure that long-term viability in of those industries. And this is particularly important as we enter the green and gold runway to the Brisbane Paralympic and Olympic Games, including through things like the Rugby World Cup in 2027. We simply won't attract these large-scale sporting and cultural and business events to this part of the world if we don't invest now in the primary lever we have to decarbonise aviation. So, just in closing, the development of the SAF State of Play report by CSIRO and Boeing served as an opportunity for leaders across our local ecosystem to reflect on recent changes, discuss current issues and ideate a future way forward. Australia has a real opportunity to lead in all areas of the SAF value chain. Nevertheless, continued collaboration, coordination and partnerships will be absolutely critical if we're to optimise the opportunities that we've heard a lot about today. Additionally, relationships with others outside the aviation sector, including with agriculture, energy and waste management, will also be required to progress the future of an Australian SAF industry. That being said, the opportunity is significant and we might even say the sky is the limit. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. When I moved to Gadigal country 14 years ago, I started my degree in aerospace engineering in Sydney. And I think fast forward to 14 years to today, to now be at the start of a huge transition from fossil fuels to decarbonising an incredible global economy that is so heavily reliant on aviation is a true passion and just something I really appreciate. So being in a room full of change makers, innovators and industry leaders is an honour. And on that note, my name is Renee Wootton. I'm the Global Director of New Market Development at LanzaJet. I'm here today to help accelerate the shift to sustainable aviation fuel adoption. And so us collaborating in the room with these industry leaders amongst ourselves is truly imperative for us to capitalise on the opportunity ahead. As the SAF industry enters a phase of rapid international growth, LanzaJet is in a leading position to be able to scale SAF that is produced from ethanol and compatible with existing aircraft infrastructure today. While other companies are sharing well-intentioned goals, LanzaJet is moving its technology into action with actual production to support energy security and solve aviation's biggest challenge, the lagging supply to meet demand from the world's airlines and governments. Our aim is to decarbonise the aviation industry so that families, friends, colleagues and commerce can remain connected. And that is no small feat, but we believe we have the right people asking the right questions with the right intentions, and so we will make it happen. Our path to reaching our 2025 ambitions is pretty clear in that we know what the four major levers are to unlock the transition to a more sustainable future. They're your fleet renewals, they're your disruptive propulsive technologies, your carbon offsetting and sustainable aviation fuel. Now, we are appreciative of the level of ecosystems that need to be connected through technology, through policy, users, funding, and consumers to unlock that value for us. Before diving into future plans around our sustainable future, I want to take note on the number of people that need to come together to actually unlock this value. Building, sustaining and scaling a new industry requires true partnerships at all levels, and LanzaJet would not be this far along without the contributions of 13 major equity holders who represent the breadth of the SAF value chain, including airlines, oil majors, technology players, aerospace manufacturers and financiers. With projects spanning 25 countries and 5 continents, LanzaJet is working to scale ethanol to jet globally, and partnering with key players to unlock that SAF value chain is critical to our mission. Now, they say your past is the best indicator for your future, and I draw on our history of leadership at LanzaJet, with 14 years of technology development now being deployed commercially. We've been first to market to receive ATSM approval using our LanzaJet alcohol-to-jet technology, followed by commercial flights since 2018. We're the world's first ethanol-to-SAF plant, which is fully funded with committed offtake in place for the next 10 years. We have 3.8 billion litres of projects established around the world, which offer 95% emissions reductions and reduction in particulates and increase in energy density. And we're building growth and scalability with a world-class team of leaders, engineers and innovators. LanzaJet's alcohol technology dates back to 2010, when initial research and proof of concept began by LanzaTech and the Department of Energy's Pacific Northwest National Lab. Following 10 years of scale-up work, in 2020, LanzaJet spun out of LanzaTech, a carbon recycling leader, to solely focus on the development of SAF. Since 2023, we've begun to announce new projects across the world, including India, UK, Japan, Australia and New Zealand. And in 2024, we're the first company in the world to construct a commercial scale demonstration alcohol-to-jet SAF facility. What a mouthful. LanzaJet's Freedom Pine Fuels. LanzaJet's ethanol-to-SAF technology makes it the most adaptable pathway on the market, thanks to the flexibility of feedstocks it can use. The process can use ethanol based on being able to accept the widest variety of feedstocks. The integration of all 4 units, from dehydration, oligomerization, hydrogenation and fractionation, also represent a first-of-a-kind deployment at commercial scale. LanzaJet's technology is highly selective for SAF production, yet it is also efficient and flexible, allowing for optimization toward renewable diesel. For example, our technology can shift from 90% SAF and 10% renewable diesel split to 75% renewable diesel and 25% SAF split. Our platform offers versatility to accept feedstocks from sugar and carbohydrate feedstocks through to non-derived waste such as municipal solid waste, agricultural residues and woody waste. And wait, it gets better. We can also aggregate, synthesize and ferment industrial off-gases and direct air capture utilising our product Circulair. Circulair is our joint solution that delivers the most diverse feedstock platform of any available SAF pathway through our partnership with LanzaTech. LanzaTech aggregates and repurposes waste carbon streams into ethanol through biotechnology. LanzaJet uses its alcohol-to-jet technology and transforms that ethanol into sustainable aviation fuel. Now, Circulair and alcohol-to-jet can be used to deliver on our 2050 targets for every feedstock except for heifer. Technologies like heifer offer commercially viable SAF, but they have capacity limits. There is only so much cooking oil in the world, which is one of the primary feedstocks for heifer. Now, that's distinguished in the green bar down the bottom there. Alternatively, alcohol-to-jet is forecast to be a significant portion of the growth market in SAF in the coming decades. And with the added flexibility of our circular product, we have the capacity to scale up and provide a solution across alcohol to jet, gasification, and power to liquids, showing you the true potential of LanzaJet's technology. LanzaJet's partnership with Technip Energies is essential for driving these projects. By combining LanzaJet's innovative waste carbon conversion technology with Technip Energies' world-class expertise in process engineering and project execution, we are able to accelerate the delivery of sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel to the world. For the long-awaited update on Freedom Pine Fuels. Located in Georgia Soperton, LanzaJet Freedom Pine Fuels represents one of the most promising SAF production developments. It's a commercial-scale demonstration plant, and the facility will annually produce 10 million gallons or 37 million litres of sustainable aviation fuel and renewable diesel that meets global standards and low carbon and certified ethanol. Our plant is mechanically complete and operational. And as for a typical commercial demonstration plant, we're learning a huge amount at Freedom Pine Fuels, and those learnings no one else in the industry has, and we're able to apply that and provide that support now back to our customers. Now, we've made incredible progress in the build-own operation of this particular plant, as you can see over the years, and we're excited to be able to leverage this experience to not only deploy our technology, but to partner on joint venture and build-own-operate projects into the future. Now, in Australia, LanzaJet is partnering with project developer Jet Zero Australia, as you've seen, and we'll very shortly hear from Matt Doyle from Wagner Fuels as well. But some of our quick call-outs around projects across the world. So in Australia, LanzaJet's partnering with those two call-outs. There are incredible customers, Jet Zero Australia and Wagner. In the United Kingdom, we've also got an ethanol to SAF technology using woody waste and agricultural residues to produce SAF for Project Speedbird. And in New Zealand, LanzaJet was selected by Air New Zealand and the federal government to undertake a study for domestic SAF production. I'll come back to a few of those very shortly. Sorry, my slides are around the wrong way. So this is a great example and overview of where we're working at the moment. And just to touch on some of those call-outs there. So in New Zealand, LanzaJet was selected by Air New Zealand, the federal government, to participate in a study for domestic SAF production alongside Project Speedbird, a really exciting project for us over in the UK using woody waste and agricultural residues. Very quickly, as part of a joint venture in India, LanzaJet is working with Indian Oil, our largest oil company in India, to develop India's first ethanol-based SAF plant with local feedstocks. In Japan, we've got Cosmo Oil that we had a quick call out this morning from Flynn by, which has established a large-scale SAF production facility, creating new business opportunities within the domestic market for Japan. And then our partner, Southwest Airlines, where we're developing our largest plant ever using our alcohol-to-jet technology. What's next? We're seeing growing momentum of SAF policies and mandates, and Australia must act now to mandate policies and incentives for a thriving SAF market, ensuring domestic energy independence and reducing reliance on foreign oil. While international markets such as China rapidly build their own production facilities, historical momentum in SAF has been driven by countries like the UK, Europe, and US. Asia Pacific is emerging as a key player, and we are truly grateful for the amount of collaboration and the effort that has been received by the Australian government to continue our great work and collaboration on policies that benefit the Asia Pacific region. In closing, for us at LanzaJet, we have been backed by the world's first alcohol-to-jet plant and independently proven technology across both LanzaTech and LanzaJet solutions. We've got a bold mission to decarbonise the aviation industry, and it also puts us as partner of choice for accelerating a cleaner and more sustainable future with our first mover advantage. We are truly committed to collaborating, so if you have any questions that need to be answered off the back of these sessions, please come and find us. There's multiple LanzaJet representatives. Flynn and Dean also share the room with me. And that is it from LanzaJet. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everybody, and echo the sentiments of the previous speakers. Thank you to Bioenergy Australia for hosting another, what I'm sure will be a great Renewable Fuels Week. So my name's Andrea Polson. I look after stakeholder engagement and communications at Licella. I'd like to share today some information on a project that we announced last week, Project Swift, which we're very excited to share with you today. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we gather on today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. For those of you that aren't aware of who Licella are, we are, if you're wondering who the mysterious company was that received $8 million from ARENA that Minister Boeing mentioned earlier today, that would be Licella. So delighted to receive ARENA's support for our first flagship project in Australia for biofuels, utilising our pioneering Australian developed and commercialised technology, HTL. So Licella are an Australian-based but global technology development company and now project developer. So our platform enables the production of both advanced biofuels but also biomaterials and biochemicals. Our platform is hydrothermal liquefaction, which utilises hot compressed water to transform solid feedstock, biogenic materials like biomass residues and wastes, into a liquid biointermediate, and that biointermediate is then upgraded to produce low carbon liquid fuels. So it has been designed over the past 17 years and is now being rolled out commercially through a number of facilities overseas, and the first one being in Canada, which is in final stages of commissioning. The platform has been designed to be scaled to be modular and simple. So out of the 7 core modules, only 1 is custom. The others utilise standard equipment, and that provides a very replicatable platform that we can easily scale up across multiple markets. And why is that important? Well, as we've heard already, obviously there's a huge demand for these products and they are critical to the energy transition. To reach what could be net zero for aviation by 2050, sustainable aviation fuel could account for up to 90% of all jet fuel. But to reach that volume, we really need to unlock new feedstocks, and really that's where emerging and new generation technologies such as hydrothermal liquefaction can really play an important role. And as we've already heard, it won't be one solution that is really the answer to meeting future demand. It will be multiple pathways. Hydrothermal liquefaction has the advantage of being able to access new feedstocks. Those which we call future-proof feedstocks combine both high supply with a high potential for emission reductions, and feedstocks such as residues from agriculture and from forestry and municipal solid waste fit into that category of those feedstocks that can allow us to reach the scale of production that we need to meet the future demand for sustainable aviation fuel. Licella's unique capability to access a wide range of lignocellulosic materials as feedstock puts us in a position that is recognised by our global partners such as Shell to be able to scale production of SAF and other low carbon fuels. So as I mentioned, Project Swift, which we announced last week, is supported by ARENA, and we will be announcing more partners over the coming months. It's a flagship project utilising our HTL Australian developed technology. It is now entering pre-feed and soon into front-end engineering phase, proposing for co-location in the Bundaberg region with the ISIS Central Sugar Mill, who will play the role of both the site and feedstock provider. So we're looking at targeting agricultural residues, converting to biointermediate to then be produced on site into sustainable aviation fuel and other low carbon liquid fuels through our upgrading partnership with Shell. The facility is looking to initially target 150,000 tonnes of agricultural residues and converting that into up to 60 million litres of biofuels, of which around 40 million litres would be SAF. And we'll be announcing further details of that project, but looking to target an FID next year and working with, as I say, our upgrading partner Shell. So our process that we're looking for Project SWIFT is an integrated two-step biorefinery. So the first step being the conversion of agricultural residue feedstocks and other lignocellulosic products into a biointermediate, and then be upgraded using Shell's refining and upgrading expertise into targeting significant volumes of SAF, but also other fuels such as renewable diesel and potentially marine as well. So I did mention, Licella, we were founded in 2007 on the principle of carbon transformation, and we operate in multiple markets, biofuels being one of those. But over the last 4 years, we've made significant progress with the commercialisation of our technology. So utilising the commercial demonstration facility that we have up on the New South Wales Central Coast. That facility has been really the blueprint for our first full-scale commercial facility in Canada. So that is through a joint venture with Canfor, who are one of the world's biggest pulp and paper companies. So through a 50-50 joint venture, which is called Arbius, that first facility, which is construction complete and now undergoing final stages of commissioning, really sets the blueprint for commercial rollout here in Australia through Project SWIFT. So and also we have another facility in the UK through licensing with a company called Mira. That is for end-of-life plastics, advanced recycling, and you can see that that is also construction complete and in final stages. So we have a number of projects globally, which so our Executive General Manager David Taylor will be speaking about in this afternoon's session, but wanted to share a little more around the Arbius facility. It's in Prince George in British Columbia in Canada, and it really shows the importance of policy in getting these first-of-kind facilities. As many of the speakers have already mentioned, British Columbia has a low-carbon fuel standard, and there was support as well in the form of incentives from the provincial government, which really makes it so much easier to build these first-of-kind facilities. The advantage we have here in Australia is we can access the learning. So Licella was leading both the engineering and the construction development of this project, and it's 25,000 tonnes initially of biomass from forestry, so forestry residues. That will be scaled up pretty quickly to a 50,000 tonne capacity, and what we will be doing in Queensland is actually replicating that into 150,000 tonnes. So I've got a short video which shows this recent video of the final stages of construction there. You can see on site, you can see actually in the back of the video the pulp and paper mill. Zooming out, the front end is on the left-hand side, feedstock preparation, and on the right-hand side you've got the CAT HTR vertical reactors there. So that's a 25,000 tonne blueprint, and that will be additional trains added to increase capacity over as it scales up over the course of 2025. So where to from here for our local project? So we are well advanced in the planning, permitting, site investigation stage and heading into pre-feed. We'll be commencing feed later in the second half of this year, and then, as I mentioned, looking to make FID in 2026. Activities such as stakeholder engagement, community consultation, working with First Nations are well underway, and we look forward to sharing more insights through the knowledge sharing activities that will be part of our ARENA funding work. So for those of you who'd like to learn more, you can go to Licella's website. We've got a dedicated Project Swift page there, which we'll be continuing to update over the course of the year. And we've also got a stand out in the exhibition space, so would love to talk to you. Please come have a chat to us. And yeah, if you'd like to find out more, you can always reach me here as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So it's a pleasure to be here today again at Low Carbon Liquid Fuels. My name's James Williamson, and just as a very brief introduction to myself, I've probably spent the last 10 years working in feedstocks and biofuels. First as a feedstock supplier in food processing, and then the last almost 6 years at Neste in renewable fuels refining. Let's see if we can. So we're going to be touching on a topic that I'm very passionate about, which is the, well, basically the turning of feedstocks into biofuels. And as Neste, we're sort of almost 20 years in now in actually producing renewable diesel and more recently SAF. Hopefully we can provide some learnings from commercial production. So we're going to touch very, very quickly on the, the prospect of biofuels. We're going to look at, as I mentioned, the commercialization of feedstocks. We're going to look at what it takes to build a resilient and sustainable supply chain. And then the bit that I'm really looking forward to is sort of taking these fundamentals and applying them from an Australian context, including some of the challenges and opportunities. Now, hopefully this is a bit of a formality, as I've had a lot of great guest speakers beforehand, but I thought a good place to start would be to really look at why biofuels? Why should we pursue this endeavour in Australia? If the idea of biofuels is indeed just purely decarbonisation, wouldn't it be cheaper or easier perhaps to go and buy an Australian carbon credit unit for only, say, $35 Australian a tonne? You don't have to pay 50 cents a litre excise on it. You don't even have to pick it up. You can order it online. So why biofuels? So I won't leave you hanging. Let's have a go. So on the left-hand side here, actually, I probably should start. I should make a point that my objective here today is definitely not to put carbon credits on trial. Honestly, I believe that they probably count more than their fair share of criticism. But really, if there is one message that I'd like to leave you with on this slide, it is the idea of introducing biofuels to decarbonise your supply chain directly as a concept is fundamentally a very different process from abatement or offsetting, where effectively we take the carbon liability and we sort of transfer that to another party or potentially even another country. I have a colleague in the audience today, Epen, that likes to talk about renewable diesel working best in the dirtiest and oldest engines. And that is totally true, as you really do see the benefits. But the reality is today, a lot of the heavy equipment, machinery and vehicles that exist in hard to abate sectors, so trucking, mining, shout out to our good friends at Rio Tinto and their Pilbara trial, and aviation, have only been purchased in the last couple of years. So they might have another 10, 20, even 30 years of lifespan left to run. So the study on the right-hand side here that I've included, and I've put a QR code there just to make it a bit easier to download. So the message or what we're trying to propose here is that when you take the full supply chain into account and the need to completely replace, potentially electrify or introduce hydrogen, that actually biofuels today at the current technology level represent one of the most cost-effective ways to directly decarbonise our supply chain. And then you have all these other benefits on the left-hand side. It was already sort of touched on by Senator Van today, but we have energy security. There's a very good case to be made that during COVID, most recently, our fossil fuel supply chain sort of fell apart. Well, biofuels, by nature of their shorter supply chains, kept on pumping. We can talk about circularity. We are upgrading relatively low-value waste and residues and turning those into high-value advanced biofuels. And all those economic benefits are streaming straight into the local economy. Biofuels can act as a buffer against market shocks. Biofuels are derived by fundamentally different supply chains. They're not affected in the same way as fossil fuels by tariffs, geopolitical events, possibly even conflict in the Middle East. Air quality, this is one that I don't think that we actually touch on enough. Biofuels, or specifically renewable diesel, does not contain aromatics. So actually it doesn't contain a lot of the carcinogens that conventional diesel does. You're actually improving the air quality by using it. And this is not something that's really taken into account when it comes to carbon or abatement credits. And then finally, you get the decarbonisation of all the other downstream products that flow in the supply chain. So hopefully I'm now sort of singing to the choir, and we've sort of established that biofuels might be something we want to pursue. So let's look at what it takes to commercialise a feedstock. So on the left-hand side, very much like any product life cycle, we have to first perform a commercial analysis. We need to look at whether the feedstock is extractable at a sufficient quantity at the right sort of commercial levels. We then have to conduct a very sort of detailed risk assessment, sustainability audit to make sure that those sustainable credentials are in place. After that, we have to do a batch run through our refinery. These are multi-billion euro assets, at least for the HEFA stream. So we need to make sure that none of the contaminants do any sort of immediate damage to our refinery reactors. Point 4 is often led by my esteemed colleague Stephen's team, where we have to actually go to end market regulators in these global biofuel markets and convince them with science and data that indeed these feedstocks are worthy of being admitted to these international frameworks. And only after completing points 1 through 4 do we actually get to finally produce some commercial volumes. And the point that I'd probably leave you with here is that that process can take anywhere from a few months, but much more likely a few years, and it is quite an expensive and long-term process, so we really do need to kick that off as soon as we can. Very briefly on Australia, our primary feedstocks here, you've probably already heard, but animal fat, we've got used cooking oil, and then also waste and residues from vegetable oil refining. Our hope is that the sort of missing piece of the puzzle to take, at least from a HEFA perspective, Australia's feedstock to the next level is so novel vegetable oils. There we go. So we've got a couple of, so when it comes to maintaining our supply chain, we've got a couple of options when it comes to chain of custody. I won't touch on these too much today, as I'm sure that our audience members are very across them. The main figure that I'd like to point to here is this idea taken from the ICC EU, which is sort of the framework of choice for biofuels these days, but it's this idea that in the supply chain for biofuels, each member or each sort of participant individually is responsible for verifying and third-party auditing their component, and it's the sort of passing through of paperwork or proof of sustainability that holds the supply chain sort of together and makes it quite robust. And the advantage of this process is that not one participant, so say a refiner right at the end, has the sole responsibility of auditing and maintaining that entire supply chain. Okay, we finally get to talk about Australia. So this is the G20 in terms of fossil fuel use. I think it's 2023. And you can see Australia, we are well and truly punching above our weight. Number 5. Now, some of you greenies in the audience, hopefully there's more than a few, might look at this and cry. It is a lot of prospective emissions, but where some might see emissions, I see from a biofuels perspective, opportunity. The point that I would make here is that, and I think it's been made by others, Australia on volume uses a lot of fuel, especially on a per capita basis. I think we use roughly about 32,000 megalitres. And so the point here I'd make is that even a very modest target or mandate could result in figuratively standing up an entire biofuel sector overnight. Now let's talk about supply and feedstock. So on the left here, I have meat production as sort of a proxy for animal fat. Sorry for our vegetarian friends out there. And on the right-hand side, we have rapeseed or canola. And again, wow, Australia, we are punching above our weight. Number 1 in the G20 for meat production, and number 2 from a canola perspective. So really, we're right up there. And what are these green ticks and the crosses? There seems to be quite a few green ticks. Well, these are effectively representing countries which have a national approach, either a mandate or a target to biofuels. And so, it's starting to look like Australia, at least in the G20, is starting to look like the odd one out. So bringing it all together, we opened our direct offices here in 2019, and one of the things that we learned straight away is that actually accessing infrastructure in Australia is very tough, certainly from a feedstocks perspective. Ports, just by structure of what they are, tend to be monopolies, and they are increasingly privatised. Accessing terminals here is actually not an easy feat. We do run a network of terminals now, but it has been an ongoing process, and this is definitely a sector requiring of more investment. Then beyond that, if you look at the feedstock industry itself, similarly, more competition would be, I think, beneficial. They say competition breeds efficiency, and it is a consolidated sector again. So, we'd like to see more competition enter. We need to look at reducing our value and carbon chain across the full feedstocks and biofuel sector. The fuels and feedstocks are invariably worth more the lower carbon signature or life cycle assessment that they carry. And then finally, and this is more of a shout out to CSIRO and the good work that they already carry out, but we need to create more sort of open source development of novel feedstocks. I've got in brackets there novel vegetable oils. We can't afford for IP or genetics to be shelved for multiple years without intent of commercial use. That's a benefit that's being missed by farmers, so we really need to work on that. So bringing it sort of all together, hopefully this is going to be a point that you just hear again and again, but hopefully I've made a good case that Australia, we have the potential supply and we do have the potential demand. And I think what has been missing, and I'm not saying it's an easy task, but what's been missing to date is the collective national ambition. But if we can figure that out, I think Australia has a very bright future when it comes to feedstocks and biofuels. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be quick. I think it's a very long session. My name's Matt Doyle, CEO of Wagner Sustainable Fuels. Again, I'd like to thank Bioenergy Australia for what's turning out to be a really great conference, and the speakers before me, it looks like we've gotten some really good momentum in the industry, and hopefully we can add to that. For those who don't know Wagner Sustainable Fuels, we've grown out of the Wagner group of companies, so companies like Wagner's, the ASX listed materials business, very much into sustainability, have a polymer concrete that has no Portland cement, and Wagner Corporation, which is a private asset and infrastructure owner, probably have assets approaching $1 billion. And then we have also received some great support from the Queensland Government and Australian Federal Government. Looking at our activities, we are delighted to have Boeing as an investor in Wagner Sustainable Fuels, so providing capital, but also the breadth and depth of their experience in SAF over the growth of the industry for the last sort of 15, 20 years. So we're very much a company of action and looking to lean in to start the SAF industry here in Australia. We have a medium-term vision, which is a production facility, which I'll get to at the end, but I really wanted to touch on our SAF blending facility, which will be operational this year. Firstly, just touching on one of the assets of Wagner Corporation, which has some great synergies with what we're doing here. This is the Wellcamp Airport, which is about 150 k's west of Brisbane. It's an airport, first private airport set up in Australia in the last 50 years, built in 510 days by the Wagner civil business. So very much a habit of just doing things, leaning in, getting things done. We welcome domestic customers like Qantas, Rex, Royal Flying Doctor Service, international customers for freight being Cathay Pacific. We do a lot of work with AirAsia as well. And we also work with the ADF hosting exercises and refuelling their systems. Importantly, we have a very large business park surrounding the airport, 8,000 acres. Boeing are coming in as a key tenant there. So Boeing is setting up their first manufacturing facility outside of North America to final assembly of the MQ-28 Ghostbat, which is an Australian designed platform. So that's underway now. And now we will be host of the Australia's first SAF blending facility, which is currently under construction. So I'll run through that a little bit. So that location you see there is the Wellcamp Airport. Due to our lack of local production, we do have to import SAF to get this thing underway. But that has some great advantages. We see SPK moving through our ports, on our roads, and going up to Wellcamp. It will be processed there in a blending facility. The system will be, or the fuel will be certified, ready for export over to our fuel farm. So the the fuel and the fuel farm itself will be certified under RSB, so our customers will have internationally recognised Scope 1 and Scope 3 certificates coming from that. So that blended product will be provided into our infrastructure, so we'll be doing mass balance with customers at our airport. We will also be setting up on registries both with RSB and IATA, so be able to provide Scope 1 and Scope 3 certificates locally within Australia but internationally, and this will really help airlines reduce the cost in our unmandated market here. We also have the ability to export from this location, so once we're established we can provide customers physical fuel in other locations, so we've got export capability there, and we also have F-34 capability, so we'll be servicing the ADF in their needs to test SAF and not have commitments. So we do see this as an industry enabling project. It really is something that can help boost the industry by providing SAF on a normalised basis. So airlines can get benefit through consistent SAF. They can utilise their ability to lean in with their support into government, and it really shows visible leadership. So with the airlines on board, we can see massive advances in the acceleration of policy. It provides a toe in the water for the supply chain, so we'll be moving neat SAF or SPK through ports, through logistics systems. We will be providing blended fuel into airport infrastructure, and it will really just normalise that use of SAF, so hopefully demystify the questions that probably not much in this room, but people outside this room commonly ask. And then for government, it'll really act as a beacon or focus for the creation of policy. So we really welcome anyone to come and have a look, especially government, to see SAF working, see that it's a standard fuel once blended, and we can really get down to what's required within policy rather than the sort of periphery items that are bogging us down at the moment. The sort of medium-term view for Wagner Sustainable Fuels is the development of a production facility in Brisbane. A very dynamic name we have for that, called the Wagner SAF facility. So essentially we are taking city waste, so municipal solid waste, construction demolition waste, commercial industrial waste, processing that through gasification. So we are utilising technology from MyRechem that allows us to utilise raw waste, and that's really important, is that where FT is kind of letting us down on the municipal waste side is having to purify the MSW, which is very, very difficult. The syngas from gasification goes into fermentation, provided by LanzaJet, so they have several facilities around the world that are already processing syngas, and then that produces about 190 million litres of ethanol. So that's probably more than the current total stocks of ethanol in Australia at present. That ethanol is then processed to SAF and renewable diesel through the LanzaJet ATJ facility, so 102 million litres of SAF and 12 million litres of renewable diesel is the current design. With this facility, it is essentially a recycling facility. When you look at, we have 100% of waste coming in, and we process 96%, or a bit over 96% of that waste into products. So we produce SAF and renewable diesel as primary products, but we also produce slag, which we use in our concrete business, and that's it's a product that we currently import from China, so we can cut off that import line and provide that 500 metres down the road. We produce concentrated protein, so that will go into the feedlots surrounding Brisbane, and there's also some off gases that we capture and use for energy and use for other things. So this is it's a critical project for the advancement of our business, and we've completed our pre-feed. We're in a stage now where we're finalising the commencement of feed, and that'll see us reaching financial close maybe the back end of 26 for first production in the end of 29. So that's all for me. Very happy to answer any questions and have chats during the discussion. Thank you.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Margaretha Coertzen from GHD, and I'm the Technical Service Line Leader for Hydrogen and Hydrocarbons for APAC at GHD, which is an internal position. I'm a process engineer by training, and I've been involved in a number of unconventional oil projects, starting way back when, in the days when coal and gas to liquids was still a thing, and migrating to bio-based fuels, as well as a bunch of renewable and other low-carbon hydrogen projects. I'm trying something new today because I managed to bore myself to tears the other day when I was making a presentation. So today I've decided to speak to you without slides, which is a bit of a revolutionary concept for an introverted engineer, but here we are. I'm turning a milestone age this year, I'm 50, and I have raised two young people, one who turns 21 this year and one who turns 18, so after that everything else is easy and I may as well be brave and give this a go. My talk today is about e-SAF and how it could provide Australia the opportunity for scaling up for sustainable aviation fuel production. From an article published in February 2025 on aviation and the energy transition, air travel continues to grow. In 2024, 6.5 million barrels per day of aviation fuel was consumed in the world, with overall consumption of aviation fuel estimated to rise to almost 12 million barrels per day by 2050, based on Bloomberg's latest aviation fuel outlook. On the other hand, over 40 airlines aim to achieve net zero aviation by 2050, and the aviation industry has agreed to halve its CO2 emissions by 2050 compared to 2005, and to realise CO2 neutral growth from 2020. Therefore, SAF production will be crucial to help achieve these goals. At present, SAF is only commercially produced through the HEFA process, as we know, and the global HEFA standalone capacity currently is at around 4 to 5 million tonnes and is expected to double by 2030. Assuming that all of this is SAF, 5 million tonnes per annum roughly translates to 40.5 million barrels per annum, or if the growth is met, 81 million barrels per annum by 2030. This means we currently have enough SAF that is produced globally to provide us with aviation fuel to fly for 6 days a year. If we wanted to meet even the current jet fuel consumption of 2,400 million barrels per annum, we would require approximately 380 million tonnes of oil feedstock, assuming a yield of 1,100 litres of fuel per tonne of oil feed, and that 90% of that is SAF. If that feedstock was to come from an oilseed crop, take something like Brassica carinata, that would mean we would require 3.6 million square kilometres to grow the crop, and that covers about 47% of all of Australia. This is assuming we could achieve about 1,060 kilos of oil per hectare of land. Look, it would look absolutely stunning, but it would be difficult to see how this is altogether practical. Therefore, while BioSAF will play a role in decarbonising the aviation industry, it cannot be the sole solution, and therefore we have to look to e-SAF. Assuming that jet fuel has a carbon number between C8 and C16, so let's assume that the average is C12 and that SAF is mainly paraffinic, so that we have C12H26 as a rough formula. Stoichiometrically, to produce 2,400 million barrels per annum of aviation fuel, we would need about 45 million tonnes of hydrogen per annum. That translates to 625 gigawatts worth of electrolyser capacity, assuming a utilisation factor of 45%. It's assuming that we will require about 15 hectares for 1 gigawatts worth of electrolyser capacity. This translates into 9,360 hectare or 95 square kilometres. Now we've only built the electrolyser facility, then we also need to look to renewables to drive the thing and a CO2 source. For renewable generation, we would require about 80,000 square kilometres to drive all of that power. And we would also need, for a CO2 source, assuming we have direct air capture, we would need about 250 million tonnes of CO2 per annum, and that translates to about 250 square kilometres for CO2. So in total, to provide the e-SAF, we would need 95 plus 80,000 plus 250 square kilometres to meet the current jet fuel demand with e-SAF. What does that tell us? Well, it tells us that the power engineers are clearly the problem, but no, that we require a lot less land for e-SAF than for bi-SAF generation. So from a land perspective, we have now very neatly solved the problem. In addition, as long as we have renewable power generation and water, and that's a lot of water, we can make e-SAF and meet the demand. I got into trouble for speaking about water requirements for hydrogen production a few years ago, so I won't go into that in any more detail. Also, one of my GHD colleagues will be talking about biogenic and other sources of CO2 later in the program, so we will not be touching on that right now either. We now come to the other very important element of SAF production, and that's the production cost. The production cost of HEFA SAF is approximately $1,600 per tonne. But for e-SAF, assuming that the levelised cost of hydrogen production is about $8 Australian per kilo, which is relatively good, and that cost is about $800 a tonne, we would get to an e-SAF cost of currently $4,180 a tonne. We can assume that capture cost could be reduced to about $300 a tonne over time as the technology develops, and this could reduce the production cost of e-SAF to about $2,600 a tonne. This is still 165% of what HEFA SAF costs. At this carbon capture price, hydrogen production costs would have to decrease to about $3 Australian a kilo, or approximately 40% of the current cost. While electrolyser capex could play a role in this, this would mainly be driven by a reduction in renewable power cost, with renewable power cost making up approximately 60% of the levelised cost of hydrogen production typically. So that is a quite tall order to meet. We know that electrolyser and hydrogen production costs are expected to come down over time. However, we aren't seeing the reduction in those costs quite yet. The electrolyser costs are not reducing as fast or in the predicted way, and that is because very few hydrogen projects are seeing the light of day, so that the learnings from real-life operations cannot be applied. In addition, renewable power costs may still decrease over time, but there is a quite dramatic slowdown in cost reduction. And again, DAC costs may decrease over time, but only if these projects are implemented on a regular basis. We would have to stimulate SAF and e-SAF projects through mechanisms such as mandates, and other people have touched on that already. A carbon and a hydrogen molecule does not care where it comes from, whether it's from this side or that side of the track. It will perform in the same manner, whether it's derived from a biosource or from a power source. We can all work together in the shorter term, investing in biomass and growing our biofuels industry, starting to supply hydrogen for upgrading through electrolysis and building that capacity. We can then increase our hydrogen production capacity over time, and there will always be a need for a carbon from a source in the form of biofuels or from biomass or another carbon source for liquid fuels. To summarise, Bio-SAF will have a role to play, particularly in the near and medium term, while e-SAF may become more prominent when and if production costs are reduced. I'll leave you with a final thought. Why do engineers love their jobs? Because we get to build dreams. Thank you very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's David Stribley, one of the co-founders at HAMR Energy. First of all, I'd like to thank the Bioenergy Australia folks for organising what looks to be a really good 4 days ahead of us. And already, from the speakers you've seen there, very impressive. So hard to follow here. Now, I think I'm the second last speaker, and I know it's a pretty long session, so we'll try and keep it interesting. So today, I'm going to change gears a little bit. You've heard a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about methanol. We will talk about sustainable aviation fuel, as methanol may be one of those feedstocks. But in particular today, I want to talk a little bit about focusing on the feedstock and how we may densify, and talk about how we may have distributed production mechanisms where we may then have centralised co-processing further downstream. So I'll share a little bit about HAMR Energy, what we do. I'll share a little bit about how methanol is produced, both today and what it may look like in the future. And then I'll also share a little bit about our flagship project, the Portland Renewable Fuels Development in Victoria, and then we'll finish up. So let's get started. Okay, so just a little bit about HAMR Energy. So HAMR Energy is a renewable fuels development company. We're based in Victoria. Our focus is on developing low carbon fuels and chemicals to help decarbonise hard to abate sectors. Those sectors we see in the future being largely aviation, the maritime sectors and the chemicals sectors. All those sectors have one thing in common, and that is that we believe they'll need to have some form of low carbon fuel, so carbon being the critical part of that equation. Our mission is relatively simple, and that is to accelerate the energy transition by making low carbon fuels easy to access and adopt. And we see that doing that in two different ways. One is through the development of large-scale renewable fuels projects. We do this by leveraging Australia's renewable resources to create scale and commercially viable projects. Our focus is on the sustainable feedstock, and you'll see that with our Portland project, where we focused on forestry residues as our primary feedstock and how we convert that feedstock into a low-carbon fuel. The other element we see critical in the adoption of low-carbon fuels is the supply chain. Customers don't just need fuel at, say, Portland, for instance. They need the full integrated supply chain. So we're very focused on that as well. And today we even provide a supply chain and management of change solution looking at B100 to help customers today to take up renewable liquid fuels with our longer-term projects in the future. We are a bunch of engineers at heart, but with a real focus on commercialising low-carbon fuels. So our focus is on technology that's available today that can be implemented in the future. Okay, there's a little bit going on this chart, but it just explains some of the basic ways that methanol can be produced. So for those that don't know, methanol is the simplest of the alcohol family, and it's been produced for well over a century now. It's predominantly been made through gas reforming down the bottom there, and more recently in the last 20 years really taken up with coal gasification, particularly in China, as they move to using far more methanol. Predominantly today it's used as a chemical feedstock. There's about three primary things. One is for resins, so every one of us probably in the wood floor, methanol was used at some point there, or at least in the glues in our seats, methanol would have been used. It's used particularly in China as a plastic feedstock, where coal is converted into essentially plastics that we consume today. And then it's also used as a chemical derivative in all sorts of other industries. It's also used as a neat fuel in a lot of areas where it can either be blended, or in some provinces in China where it is literally a neat fuel in taxis and so forth. Emerging, it is becoming increasingly focused on within the maritime sector as an alternate fuel, and today we'll talk a little bit about the methanol to jet process as well, and how methanol may play a role in aviation. Renewable methanol, as it says, is very similar simple to fossil-based methanol in that it is just derived, replacing those fossil-based fuels with renewable resources. So in the case of coal, we replace the coal with biomass through the gasification pathway, and in the case of methane, replacing that with biomethane. And then I think the really interesting one, which Margaretha just talked about, is ultimately power to liquids in the future, where we can take CO2, be that from biogenic sources or through direct air capture, add hydrogen to it, and we can produce methanol that way. In that way, methanol does have the ability to ultimately scale to meet society's demands there. So I'll talk a little bit now about some of the things that I think methanol has some benefits on here, and in particular, maybe talk about the methanol to jet process. So the benefit of focusing on the resource and densifying that allows us to have decentralised methanol production where the resource is, and ideally bringing down the cost. So for instance, if you have a stranded biogas resource, you could turn that into methanol, transport that to a centralised methanol to jet facility. If you've got, like we do in Portland, where we have a lot of forestry residue, we can create methanol there, and we can then move that product to where we may want to do a methanol to jet plant where people are. It's basically, really simply, it's what we do with crude oil today. Today we produce crude oil in pretty bad places. It's where I used to work, but crude oil is generally made in places that not all of us want to live, but we then centralise the refining where we ultimately have our customers being generally near cities. So we do our crude upgrading, places like Longford where I used to work, and then we centralise that. I like to refer to that as almost the Singapore model, where we actually have distributed production of where the resource is, and then we centralise our co-processing. In that way, we get the lowest cost model in terms of what we're doing with the resource. So we densify where the resource is. We use what that resource has its advantages to, but then we co-process locally where we can actually build scale, and that's a way to bring down cost. So just a little bit of a use case here. This is a very simple diagram of our Portland Renewable Fuels project, which is located down in Portland on the border of South Australia and Victoria. Again, this has some significant strategic advantages down there. Portland is, or that green triangle area is the single biggest forestry region in Australia, with over 8 million tonnes of fibre produced per annum. It's a very dense area, and all supply chains lead to the existing port. It is also one of Australia's best onshore wind resources, and has a lot of significant existing infrastructure, be that a port, 500 kV pipeline, plenty of water. So it has what's really unique in terms of actually creating a renewable fuels project. It has the resource, it has an educated workforce on the back of having an aluminium smelter there. So it ticks a lot of the boxes in terms of producing these low carbon fuels. Our project will use biomass gasification. It's an advanced renewable fuels development, so it will add some hydrogen to it. We've gone down this pathway because one of the critical elements we see in these developments is using all the carbon that goes into the front end of the facility. We spent a lot of effort, this is Bioenergy Week, we spent a lot of effort collating all this carbon from our agricultural resources. We need to make sure we're converting every one of those atoms into a higher value product versus letting it go out the stack in the form of lower value products like CO2. That project's now gone through feasibility and moved into pre-feed. We have land and we're now working through our permitting processes there. The next stage of the development is working downstream. As I said, our focus is on the whole supply chain. So we're now looking at methanol to jet processes with partners, with a goal there to having that centralised methanol to jet process somewhere in a major city where we can then upgrade. It also allows us to expand in terms of that growth. We can have our decentralised methanol processes where the resources are. So we have other projects on the books, but then centralising that methanol to jet. And we feel that's a really important way to actually get to scale, because scale is ultimately so important in this industry to bringing down costs overall. Sorry. So, in summary, methanol. First of all, for any of these projects, you need to have a viable market. Methanol is very unique in that it can play into multiple markets, and how they evolve. For us, we've always focused on the resource, the primary resource, and how do we actually densify that resource and then move that to markets, and making sure that we cost effectively convert as much of that carbon as possible to get the highest yields. Early on, as this industry evolves, we've got to focus on industrial logic. We've got to leverage the existing infrastructure we have there. We don't have the benefits of high cost margins to try and actually defray those costs. And then the last one is we can't lose sight of that our customers ultimately need the fuel in their tank. We can't be producing fuels in the middle of nowhere and expecting that they'll come and pick it up. We need to supply full integrated solutions to our customers. So that's a little bit about methanol. Hopefully it was interesting. Thank you.
All right, thank you everyone for sticking around. I'm the last in the slot of what's been a very long session, but hopefully an informative one, before we get to a Q&A. So my name's Richard Hewell. I look after Honeywell UOP in Australia, and just really want to touch on today the importance of technology development and how we can scale up the production of low carbon fuels for what's available now and what we anticipate to be available in the future. So, standard disclaimer that we have to put in there. Just before we get into it, for those that maybe are not aware of who UOP is as a business, so UOP is part of Honeywell. UOP itself has been around for more than 100 years and is traditionally been a licensor of refining and petrochemical and gas processing technologies for those traditional oil and gas markets. And it's really been in the recent past that the pivot has happened as part of the energy transition into how do we support some of these renewable fuels and sustainability type projects that are coming about. So UOP has had a lot of R&D that we do in-house, and that still happens today in a lot of our facilities. So just very quickly on some history. So as I mentioned, traditional refining, petrochemical and gas processing technologies have been the bread and butter of UOP for more than a century. And really that's led us to sustainable technologies and solutions in low carbon fuels and among others as well. So I think everyone has either talked about or shown some derivation of this graph or chart in the discussions this morning. So I don't want to rehash the same point, but I think we're all making the same point for a reason. There's a really steep anticipated growth of demand in the renewable fuels market and SAF in particular as we go forward and as we decarbonise. A lot of that's being driven by mandates and incentives from various governments around the world. And I think the key thing is there's no one feedstock pathway that is going to meet all that demand all the way through from now to 2050 and beyond. So the technology pathways that we need are varied. We need what's available today and we need what is emerging. And a lot of the other presenters this morning have talked about some of those pathways. And I think all of those are needed and there'd be no argument on that. So really now I just wanted to spend the rest of the time, a few minutes touching on some of those technology pathways that we're engaged in, what we're doing today and what we see as being emerging into the future. So bit of a busy slide as well, but you can kind of look at the different feedstock pathways that we consider being viable for renewable fuels production. And this is not exhaustive, it's just the areas that we work in. And so you can see that top line there, which is really that HEFA-based pathway that's been talked about, where the bulk of renewable fuels are being produced from today. And as you move down that list to particularly the bottom half of the slide there, you really start to see some of these newer and emerging technology pathways that are being implemented and continue to go through developments in terms of what is being put in place. And so I'll touch on each of those just very quickly in the rest of the time. But to start with, I just wanted to give a bit of background on what is happening today in the production of renewable fuels and renewable diesel and SAF in particular. So as UOP, as a provider of technology into this industry, we have 10 units that are operating today, producing renewable fuels for the market around the world. So predominantly these have started out in the US and Europe with various projects where they are producing either renewable diesel or SAF or a combination of the two. And some of those facilities really even started as renewable diesel production that have then gone on to do another revamp and add SAF as an additional product to what they are making and serving the market. And so a couple of highlights just to point out. So obviously 2013, first unit coming online there in that space. In 2016 with World Energy was our first renewable jet or SAF unit in the US that came online. And as you can see, we're starting to get larger capacity units and different parts of the world as well starting to produce SAF. And we've seen that real shift from diesel towards SAF and a mixture of the two. So as well as these 10 units that are operating, we really see a steep ramp up as a lot of the units we have also licensed work their way through development and start to come online. So we expect several more to come online through this year and beyond. So that's really a snapshot of the space we're playing in today and what's being produced today. I think to look forward into what is coming and what is next in this space, there's just two aspects I want to touch on. One is a certification type piece, and the other is obviously a technology development piece, which is who we are at heart. And so from a certification piece, there's been a lot of discussion already around how we certify the sustainability and the carbon intensity of feedstocks, and that is very important. I think one other piece just to touch on and mention is the certification of the product itself that's going to be blended into the jet pool and where that's up to. So that really hinges on the ASTM code, and really what you can see there is that the various technology pathways that we are using today and that are emerging in the future all have a lot of the certification work done with ASTM already, enabling up to a 50% blend of that SPK into the jet pool. And so really on that list, the majority of those are already certified, and even the methanol to jet pathway, which is in the process and is quite far along, is also close to being finished as well. So very quickly, just with the last couple of minutes I had, I just wanted to touch on some of those emerging technology pathways that UOP as a business is also supporting around the world. So ethanol as a feedstock, which we've heard about, is one that we're also supporting from a technology perspective. Won't go into the details of all the steps there, but essentially the process is built on the back of commercially available technologies that are operating and have been operating in the gasoline and refining industries that have just been put together in a slightly different way than what they have before. And so a couple of examples of that where projects are starting to go ahead in the Americas in particular are on the screen there, both in a traditional ethanol sense and a second generation ethanol sense as well. And in addition to that, we've also recently had a project announced in Japan with Tayo, who's also one of the recipients of the funding from the government there. And then really on that, further emerging pathways that have been talked about as well. So things like e-SAF production, which can use the methanol pathway as an intermediary, depending on that source of carbon and hydrogen, which again really just builds on the back of commercially available technologies that are available and being used today. And then the last one there is the Fischer-Tropsch process as well, which is something that's being also used today and starting to be deployed. And again, that just really takes a gasification process or some waste or biomass and putting that through various steps to then be hydrocracked and isomerized into SPK. And again, all of those processes are using commercially available technologies that are maybe just being put together in a slightly different way. And an example of that as we see things moving forward is several projects going ahead, being licensed and getting into project development phases using some of these technologies, using the methanol pathway, using the FT pathway as well. So while we talk about these as being emerging, it is something that is starting to get implemented today. And so just to finalise, I think there's been a great focus so far on the technologies that have been deployed and are already producing SAF. And so we're looking forward to supporting that industry and the market going forward with the technologies that we've already deployed and what we're also continuing to roll out into the market. So thank you very much. Look forward to further discussions and questions through the week. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Could I please ask all the presenters to join me up here, grab a chair, and we'll then open it up to the audience for some questions. Great. So I will open it up to the audience for questions. The bioenergy team is on both sides of the hall. They've got microphones. What I would ask is that you please identify yourself. So who are you? What organization are you with? And if you have a question and it's directed to a particular member of the panel, or is it for all of the panel? So if you could please do that, that will help speed up the process. And let's try and keep it to questions rather than comments if that's possible, because we have about 15 minutes before lunch. But as the moderator, I'll ask the first question and then I'll hand it over to the audience. Now, the topic of today's session was upscaling low carbon liquid fuels to meet global demand. And we've heard a lot from companies represented here about their plans, what they propose to do, taking projects from pre-feed to FID, going into commercial demonstration projects. So my question is really related to how do we bring this to commercial production? Now, if you look at, and I'm sorry that I have to focus on SAF here because this is about low carbon liquid fuels, and we should remember renewable diesel, and I will ask a question related to renewable diesel later. But focusing on SAF, in 2023, we produced less than 1 million tons globally of sustainable aviation fuel. This year, to meet global demand, we need about 4 to 5 million tons of SAF. That is based on mandates, voluntary demand, as well as opt-ins. According to the Air Transport Action Group, by 2030, if you look at announced policies and proposed policies, we will need 20 million tons of sustainable aviation fuel. So if you look at today's production or today's planned production, we are well short of meeting that 2030 target. So I'd like to propose this question to Renee, Matt, Mac, and Andrea. What's missing? What's missing in terms of scaling production up to meet that 2030 demand? So Andrea, first to you.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think there is clearly a strong correlation between investments that are being made in the SAF market and markets which have policy in place. So it's no surprise, but it's not enough for a market to announce an intention. I think that's a good starting point. Where probably we have a window of opportunity now in Australia where there are a number of projects that we've heard that are in feed, pre-feed. This is really where organisations, to enable an FID, positive FID for projects, and to scale up local production, we need to see commitments. And even if that is at a point in time, it needs to be an announcement and a commitment to provide certainty to underpin the investment so that private investment can co-invest with government funding as well. So both, I think, demand and supply side, but clearly where there are mandates in markets, that's where the investment in scaling up production is going to happen.
Matt?
So if I think about the current Australian context, we have no projects currently producing SAF and we have no real policy in the country. So that obviously creates challenges for developers, and that's why I'm speaking sort of on behalf of the developer community here. So the reason why we have chosen to develop our project at the scale, which is about 102 million litres per annum, project Ulysses in Towns was the first project, is because we felt it was a reasonable size and scale to be bankable, to raise capital. Now, without sort of giving away exact numbers, it's going to be less than $1 billion for that project, but even that is still material. We would love to be producing or building a bigger project. There's greater economies of scale and the like, but the reality is that actually to prove prove the concept, prove the development capability of us as Jet Zero, get a project to market. We felt that was a reasonable scale to do as a first of its kind in Australia. And then we have ambitions to be developing and building out projects at larger scale over time. But as I said, the reality is that in the current market, environment in Australia, we're sort of taking steps to lead to the bigger build out over time. But going straight into a multi-billion-dollar project, we didn't think was feasible. That's sort of an internal view, obviously, not sort of speaking for the rest of the market. But we felt that was the right scale as a first of its kind in Australia to then build out larger projects and develop, broader capability over time.
Thanks, Mike. And Renee?
Yes, thanks very much for the question. So I think the way we see it at LanzaJet is certainly that policy will unlock the market. So to Andrea's point, our projects are certainly being set up where there is the most advanced policy reflected in mandates and incentives. From there, that unlocks further investment to be able to then capitalise on the investment in CapEx subsidies or tax credits to then be able to apply and make these projects feasible. And then finally, I would suggest that feedstock security for long-term projects is the next piece. So being able to work with our customers to be able to identify where their feedstock is going to come from. And then on top of that, making sure that the frameworks that sit around the application or bringing online those feedstock capability isn't too restrictive that it actually prevents us from making any positive steps forward in the first place. So making sure that we're incentivising anyone that comes to the table with the slightest progress rather than it being a 50% requirement for greenhouse gas emission reduction to be able to tap into some tax credits, maybe reducing that to 10% in the shorter term and then seeing those incremental increases from there.
Thanks, Renee. And Matt, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, thanks. Second, Mac's comments there. I think there's a sensible scale for projects and definitely demand and supply side policy is required. I would like to see a shift from our government funding agencies like CEFC and ARENA to really support projects, not just in the initial early stages where you can apply a small amount of capital. It seems to be okay to get capital there. It's more that valley of death between the finishing of those projects to FID. And it's really, we're in an industry where HEFA technology is proven, but every technology outside of that is not. So there's the government has an opportunity to really lean in and boost this industry, which will allow us to get the initial projects out of the way, then scale, and that'll scale the industry.
Thanks. Okay, I'd like to open it up to the audience if you have any questions.
G'day, Nathan from DSTG. I'd like to ask Matt, specifically on your blending project, what size of parcel can you blend or planning to blend at the moment?
Yeah, so it is a batch blending process. We blend about 100,000 litres each batch, and we currently blend for 2 hours once every 10 days. So a massive amount of additional capacity, but it's more the demand side. So we're limiting our exposure to get the facility underway, but we're hoping, it's really is a build it and they will come scenario, and we need to just get infrastructure in the ground, get SAF flowing, and willing to work with customers to increase that volume.
Thank you. There's a question up front here. Just over here.
Hi, my name is Maria. I'm leading the company. We convert plastics directly into high-grade diesel with the potential possibility to tweak the catalyst to produce SAF. So my question will be probably weird. Do you consider fuel from plastic as bio?
Okay, who would? Who's the question directed to? Anyone like to answer that?
I might start. Interestingly, you look at the US market, they probably don't. You get penalised. And they were the first sort of into the market developing policy. Then you look at UK and Europe, you actually get benefit. You're recycling carbon. So I think we need to, when we're creating our policy, look at the more advanced areas of policy development to show that we are creating probably new plastics from old plastics, rather than if you recycle a plastic it gets weaker and weaker, or you put it through a process like yours, we can create a virgin plastic again that's strong. So I think we need to look that way.
Yeah, just to clarify, our technology, it's patented, nobody does it yet. They do, you can receive like oil that you have to distill, etc., etc. We're the first technology that does a fuel directly, so from the plastics. Right, you got the idea. So the question I've been asked today, like, do you consider this diesel as bio? I don't know. You just take plastic, convert it, yeah.
I'd imagine it just comes down to the carbon intensity. So it will have a lower carbon intensity than diesel. It probably won't have as lower carbon intensity as an e-fuel.
Yeah, like 50% lower, yeah.
So, and that's probably as an industry how we should be talking about carbon intensity and actually looking at, and there's a cost benefit to that. You may pay a lot for an e-fuel, but you get zero carbon intensity. It might be a lot cheaper to recycle, but you get a 50%. So I just look at the life cycle carbon intensity. Whether it's bio, whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. And maybe a question for future networking, like who can help with certifying the potential stuff in that legislation? Thank you.
Just quickly on that, LanzaJet have done some work with some clients around trying to get certification of certain feedstocks, and that was to that point around qualifying feedstocks, you know, rather than looking for the perfect solution, let's look for an incremental step and try and look at expanding what feedstocks are available to play with. So.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here.
Florence Lindhaus from the German Chamber. From a German point of view, I can tell you straight away, forget about plastic because it's not renewable in the sense that you would be incentivized to create more. So it's not at all regarded as a fuel source. But speaking about the credibility of the source, this panel is supposed to talk about production to meet global demand, yet we're talking about admittedly limited biological feedstocks, with few speakers addressing e-SAF. I wonder, what is it that is holding back the production of e-SAF in Australia? Is it that the first step motivation is to do biofuels because of the availability, which will be finite, and then everyone is going to tackle the harder business of e-SAF? Or is there actually a barrier that we don't know of, or could it be that the barrier is the CO2 source and its certification status?
Maybe Margaretha?
Yes, I think this may be me. In Australia, we have the very interesting situation that we have been through an attempt to get the hydrogen industry off the ground. To this day, we haven't managed to do that, and there are a few reasons for it. The one is our renewable power is not cheap, and that's what you need to drive renewable hydrogen. We are looking at 100, 120, even more than that, dollars per megawatt, and that does not make for cheap renewable hydrogen. So we've been through that whole wave of development where a lot of projects we're trying to get off the ground, build 10 megawatts worth of electrolyzers. Then, projects we're looking at 500 megawatts, 1 gigawatt. None of those projects have actually come to realization as yet. And I think because of that, there's a real hesitation to get into that area. The other thing is CO2. So we have very limited biogenic CO2 sources in Australia. We have Manildra, for example. They would be perfect. But other than that, there are very few biogenic sources that really make sense. They're mostly small, lots of AD facilities, but really a drop in the ocean. So for those two reasons, I think we are really struggling.